rods, also called flying rods and sometimes skyfish, are similar to crop circles. Skeptics admit their existence. The only question is what they really are, and if they are something truly paranormal. Air rods have never been seen with the naked eye, but they are captured by cameras all over the world. Are they living beings, aliens, a UFO? For those who believe in the cryptozoology-based theory of air rods, they are living creatures that may be related to older stories of atmospheric animals. However, these cryptids are a well-known phenomenon in the photography world. Air rods can also be video errors created by motion blur, especially in embedded videography, and are typically after image trail of flying creatures, especially insects. Therefore, people familiar with photography particularly do not believe in these cryptids. Somewhat more bizarre theories claim that air rods may not be made of matter, perhaps electromagnetic currents or some other energy. Maybe some unknown fifth phase of matter other than solid, gas, liquid, and plasma. They could have evolved from cloud descent organisms. They could be tears in reality, which is a concept in physics too complex for simple-minded to understand. I never took physics. I took environmental science instead. At first glance, air rods seem strange, otherworldly, or even scary. The most studied films depicted the rods flying 10 feet from the camera, approaching the ground and passing between objects, with nearby trees and bushes visible behind the wands. Unlike a bug, the rods moved smoothly and were exceptionally agile, seeming to fly according to some unknown method that defied all known laws of aviation. However, a closer examination reveals a clear and compelling explanation. Is it easy to fake these photos of models or computer-generated images? Though with the sheer number of air rod footage, are all of them intentional hoaxes? They claim there's a lot of air rod footage, but searching on Google, I'm not finding much to show you, so... Air rods were discovered in the 1990s. People noticed that some movies, from home videos to blockbuster movies, had strange glitches that looked like fuzzy streaks that were mostly transparent, sometimes whitish. Most were rapidly moving and barely visible. People studied movies for such anomalies. They found that these rods were widespread. In countless movies, they lurk almost unnoticed in corners, including old TV shows, movies, and sporting events. A detailed investigation of films revealed several very interesting aspects. When the rods were zoomed in on, they displayed all the properties of three-dimensional objects. In other words, they were not spots on the camera lens or the film itself, but were something unintentionally caught in the environment. This three-dimensionality of air rods has been proven beyond a doubt by the kind of measurements and tests that only professionals can do. Careful measurements showed that most of the rods were between 4 inches and 3 feet long. They appeared to be single cylinders with no distinct head or tail ends, though they had a number of additions along its body. In some air rods, these appendages look like fins that vibrate rapidly along the length of their body in waves. In others, they look more like bee wings rapidly flapping. In most cases, the rods are one color and transparent, making them unnoticeable unless you are intentionally looking for them. A cylindrical part often vaguely resembles a camera lens hair, but the inclusions of three-dimensional movements mean that they cannot be hair on the camera lens. These rods seem to operate intelligently, sometimes followed each other, and seemed to play with each other as observed in butterflies. They sometimes followed people. They never passed through other objects. They always went around them, even if that meant deviating from the previously chosen path. They seemed to indicate that they could not pass through solid objects and that they could be alive. But if they were living creatures, why did people never see them? Why were they only seen in movies? And what could they be? Because the rods are blurry, many fairly common items have been identified by amateurs as rods, which are probably random film development anomalies or hairs on the camera lens. It has become popular to claim that they are not living beings, but UFO probes sent by extraterrestrials. There is no concrete evidence linking aliens and air rods. People just think it seems like a good idea. One of the clearest evidence of air rods is cave footage shot in New Mexico. Actual scientists have made attempts to explain this phenomenon. The biggest mystery likely is what material could they be made of. How can you see something on film even if it's transparent, but never with the naked eye? No material with such a property is known. Some claim that air rods move too fast for people to see them. Although they are fast, many movies show them taking several seconds to spin around a person. Anything moving at that speed should be visible. The air rods appear as if they vibrate rapidly, which is what makes them blurry. This phenomenon is like rapidly rotating blades of a fan. As the blades speed up, they blur and gradually become almost transparent, but you can still see them. They might be some kind of insect. They would be a new species because no one has previously reported invisible insects. Those that are not computer generated are the result of a fast-moving flying creature moving in the camera's field of view. They appear when a creature, usually an insect, although sometimes birds or bats, moves quickly in the interlaced video. In interlaced video, multiple still images are placed into a singular frame of the video being played. When the video is interlaced, normally moving insects appear as air rods. In the image, the air rods appear at longer exposures because moving insects are captured on film several times along their flight path, so that they appear to form air rods. Though they have been shown to be a problem with cameras showing multiple wing flaps of an insect instead of one, creating a rod effect. The transparency of the rods is due to the background being captured between frames, the dexterity and fluidity of the movements, which undermines their size and shape from the physical frame, is much smaller than what is shown. However, it seems suspicious that people can't see them, but the camera can. Although they are transparent, fast-moving, and blurry, it seems that people should be able to see them without cameras, especially with the estimated sizes of 4 inches to 3. The McMinnville UFO photos were taken by a farming couple, Paul and Evelyn Trent, near McMinnville, Oregon, on May 11th, 1950. The photos were reprinted in Life magazine and in newspapers across the country. They were often considered among the most famous UFO photographs. UFO skeptics consider these photos to be fakes, although many UFOologists continue to claim that the photos actually depict a genuine three-dimensional, unidentified flying object in the sky. Evelyn Trent walked back to her farmhouse after feeding her rabbits. Before reaching the house, she noticed a slow, metallic, disc-shaped object moving from the northeast. She called her husband Paul, who was in the house. He claimed that he also saw the object. After looking at the object for a while, he returned to their home for their camera. He said he managed to take 2 photos of the object before it sped off to the west. Paul Trent's father also claimed to have seen the object for a moment before it flew away. The Trents gave this description of events on a radio interview, but had given a slightly different version of the incident to the local McMinnville newspaper. Evelyn Trent stated, "We'd been out in the backyard. Both of us saw the object at the same time. The camera, Paul thought. Paul thought it was in the car, but I was sure it was in the house. I was right. And the Kodak was loaded with film." The roll of film in the Trent's camera was not entirely used up, so the Trents did not have the film developed immediately. The film was not released until the remaining footage was used for family pictures on Mother's Day 3 days later. 47 years later, in a 1997 interview, the Trents stated that they initially thought the object being photographed was a secret military aircraft and feared that the photographs might cause them trouble. Local newspaper editor Mr. Powell convinced Trent to lend him negatives. Powell examined the negatives and found no evidence that they had been tampered with. On June 8, 1950, 2 photographs were published on the front page of the newspaper. The headline read, "Finally, real photographs of a flying saucer." The story and photographs were later collected by the International News Service for other newspapers around the country, giving them extensive publicity. Life magazine published cropped versions of the photos. On June 26, 1950, along with a photo of Paul and his camera, the Trents were promised that the negatives would be returned to them. However, they were not returned. Life magazine told the Trents that they had misplaced the negatives. In 1967, negatives of Trent's photos were found in the files of United Press International. They were then loaned to Dr. William K. Hartman, an astronomer who worked for the government-funded UFO research project at the University of Colorado. The Trents were not immediately told that their lost negatives had been found. Hartman interviewed the Trents and was impressed by their sincerity. Apparently, the Trents never asked for money for their photos, and he found no evidence that they sought fame from them. In Hartman's analysis, he wrote that this is one of the few UFO reports in which all the factors investigated, geometric, psychological, and physical, appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object that is metallic, disc-shaped, tens of meters in diameter, and not evidently artificial, flew within sight of two witnesses. One of the reasons for this conclusion was the photometric analysis of the images. Hartman stated that the brightness of the underside of the object appeared to be brighter than the underside of the oil tank in the images. This may be due to the effects of the atmospheric extinction, which is the reduction in brightness of stellar objects as their photons pass through our atmosphere. The same effects that cause distant mountains to appear washed out and blue, a concept too complex for me to understand. This effect indicates that the objects were further from the camera than the container, rather than small, localized objects. However, Hartman also raised the possibility that the images were fabricated. He noted that the object appears to be beneath a pair of wires, as seen in two photos. We may question whether it could have been a model suspended from wires. This possibility is strengthened by the observation that the object appears beneath roughly the same point in the two photos, in spite of them having been taken from two positions. These tests do not rule out the possibility that the object was a small model suspended from a nearby wire. Hartman also noticed a contradiction which later became the main objection of skeptics. He noted that the overall lighting in the image was consistent with what would be expected at sunset, but noted that there could be a possible discrepancy in view with the fact that the UFO, the telephone pole, possibly the garage on the left, and especially the left of the distant barn, are illuminated from the right or east. The house in particular appears to have a shadow under its roof that would suggest a daylit photo, and combined with the eastward light source, one would argue that the photos were taken on a dull, sunlit day at, say, 10 a.m. After completing his research, Hartman returned the negatives to the United Press International, who informed the Trents. In 1970, Trents demanded the negatives to be returned to them, saying they were never paid for the negatives and therefore wanted them back. They were eventually returned 5 years later. Optical physicist for the U.S. Navy, Bruce Maccabee, analyzed the photos and concluded that they were not fakes and showed a real physical object in the sky. Much of his analysis is based on measurements similar to the photometric analysis made by Hartman. Maccabee argued that the brightness of the underside of the object indicated that it was some distance away from the camera, rather than a smaller nearby object. Maccabee also analyzed the location of various objects in the image, as well as the later image Hartman produced when he visited the site in 1967. From this, Maccabee argued that the object was some distance behind the power line seen in the photos, providing further evidence in his opinion that it was not a small model suspended by wires, stating that his analysis of the object found no evidence of wire or tape that suggested it was suspended from power lines. In response to skeptical claims that the shadows on the objects in the photographs indicated that they were taken in the morning and not in the early evening, as the Trents claimed, Maccabee suggested that cloudy weather may have caused the shadows. He also noted, in response to the 2013 analysis, that they found the photos to be forgery, that he showed that the lines of sight did not cross under the wires, and they did not dispute that. He stands behind his original work. In the 1980s, journalists and well-known UFO skeptics Philip J. Klask and Robert Schaefer expressed their opinion that the photos were faked and the whole incident was a hoax. Their main argument was, again, as with most, the shadows suggesting the photos were taken in morning and not in the early evening as the trench claimed. They argued that because Trench apparently lied about when the photos were taken, their entire story was therefore suspect. They also claimed that the Trench were interested in UFOs even before the alleged sightings. They also thought the object might have been a mirror detached from a vehicle. The shape of the object bears a slight resemblance to the round mirrors used in Ford vehicles manufactured at the time of the image and is believed to have been taken. Also pointing out several inconsistencies in the Trench story, noting that their version of the incident had changed over the years. His conclusion was that the Trench made up the incident. After Schaefer sent his research and findings to William Hartman, he retracted his earlier favorable assessment of the case. In 2013, 3 researchers published 2 studies on their website, Back to the McMinnville Pictures and Evidence of a Suspension Thread. They argued that the geometry of the photographs was best suited for a small model suspended from a wire from the power lines above, and they reported detecting a thread above the object. Their conclusion was that the clear result of this investigation was that the McMinnville UFO was a model hanging by a thread. The McMinnville UFO photos remain the most publicized UFO in history. Skeptics continue to claim that the 2 photos are fakes. UFOologists continue to claim that the Trench photographs are reliable evidence to that UFOs are a real physical phenomenon. Over the years, the Trench were consistently portrayed as honest, simple farm people who never sought to profit or gain fame from their photographs. Evelyn Trent passed away in 1997 and Paul Trent in 1998. Both maintained until the end of their lives that what they saw and the photographs were genuine. In Trench UFO images led to the creation of an annual UFO festival in McMinnville and is now the largest gathering in the Pacific Northwest and the largest UFO festival in the country after the one held in Roswell, New Mexico.